Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the reinforced viewing window, watching the creature writhe in what could only be described as agony. The thing was massive, easily 12 feet tall when it managed to stand upright, which wasn't often anymore. Its crystalline exoskeleton, once probably magnificent, now showed deep cracks that leaked a phosphorescent blue fluid onto the sterile floor of the containment chamber. The other scientists called it Subject X-47, but Sarah had started thinking of it as the Weeper. Every few minutes, the creature would emit a low, haunting sound that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the research station. The sound had driven 3 junior researchers to request transfers to other projects. Dr. Martinez, the project lead, insisted it was just random vocalizations, but Sarah heard something else in those cries. Pain. Desperate, unending pain. Chen, step away from the window. Martinez's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. You're spending too much time observing that thing. We need you focused on the weapon analysis. Sarah turned to face her superior, a thin man whose eyes held the cold calculation of someone who saw everything as data points. Sir, I think we're missing something important. The creature's behavior patterns suggest it's not hostile by nature. These vocalizations, the way it curls into itself when we approach, the fact that it hasn't tried to escape even though the containment field has been down for maintenance twice this week. It's an alien killing machine. Chen, it destroyed 3 of our patrol ships before we managed to subdue it. Killed 17 good people. Martinez's jaw tightened. Your job is to figure out how its bioweapons work, so we can replicate them for our own defense. Not to psychoanalyze an alien monster. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had it all wrong. She had been studying xenobiology for 15 years, had been part of first contact protocols for 4 different species. She had learned to read the subtle signs that transcended species barriers. Fear, aggression, curiosity, and yes, suffering. The Weeper exhibited none of the typical patterns of a predatory organism. Instead, everything about its behavior screamed of trauma and confusion. Later that evening, Sarah remained in the lab long after the rest of the team had gone to their quarters. The research station orbited a dead moon in the outer rim, far from Earth's jurisdiction, which was exactly why the military had chosen it for this particular project. Here they could study their alien captive without interference from the Ethics Committee or the Interspecies Relations Council. Through the observation deck's massive windows, she could see the twisted wreckage of the alien ship they had pulled from the debris field 3 months ago. The vessel was unlike anything in their databases, constructed from the same crystalline material as the creature's exoskeleton. But what struck Sarah most was the way the ship had been damaged. The hull breaches weren't from weapons fire or collision damage. They looked almost like stress fractures, as if the ship had been torn apart from the inside by some tremendous force. A soft chime indicated that the night shift security protocols had activated. Sarah was now alone with Subject X-47. She made a decision that would either advance xenological understanding or end her career, possibly both. She accessed the containment chamber's intercom system and spoke in the gentlest tone she could manage. Hello, can you understand me? The creature's massive head lifted slightly, and those eyes that resembled fractured prisms focused on the speaker. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Weeper made a sound unlike any they had recorded before. It was softer, almost questioning. Sarah's heart raced. You can hear me, can't you? I'm sorry about what they've been doing to you. The tests, the restraints. I know you're hurting. The creature's response was immediate and heartbreaking. It pressed one of its elongated appendages against the transparent aluminum barrier and made that soft questioning sound again. Then it began to emit a complex series of tones, rising and falling in what Sarah's trained ear recognized as patterns. Language patterns. She quickly activated her personal recording device. Computer. Analyze audio patterns for linguistic structures. As the AI worked, Sarah studied the creature more closely. What she had initially taken for natural armor plating, she now realized might be some kind of technological integration. The crystalline formations weren't random. They formed intricate geometric patterns that pulsed weakly with internal light, but many of the formations were dark, cracked, clearly damaged. Analysis complete, the computer announced. Audio contains complex harmonic structures consistent with advanced linguistic patterns. Preliminary assessment suggests a mathematical basis to the communication system. Sarah's breath caught. You're trying to talk to us, aren't you? All this time you've been trying to communicate and we've been treating you like a weapon. The creature's response was unmistakable. It began tracing symbols on the barrier with its appendage, intricate mathematical equations that Sarah recognized as universal constants. Pi, the speed of light, the golden ratio. It was establishing a baseline for communication, the same protocol humanity used for first contact situations. Suddenly, the implications hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a monster or a weapon. This was a person. An individual being who had been captured, isolated, and experimented on for 3 months while desperately trying to make contact. The attack on the patrol ships hadn't been aggression. It had been self-defense. "Oh God," Sarah whispered. "What have we done to you?" The creature seemed to sense her distress and pressed both appendages against the barrier, its fractured eyes meeting hers with an expression that transcended species. In that moment, Sarah understood that everything about this project had been built on a fundamental misunderstanding. They weren't studying an alien weapon. They were torturing a refugee. The question now was what she could do about it. Going to Martinez was pointless. The man saw only what he wanted to see. The military command would be even worse. If they discovered that their alien monster was actually an intelligent being capable of communication, they would probably intensify their efforts to extract information through any means necessary. Sarah made another decision that would change everything. She was going to help the Weeper, whatever it took. But first, she needed to understand what had happened to it, why it was in such obvious pain, and how she might be able to help heal wounds that went far deeper than the cracks in its crystalline shell. As she prepared to establish proper first contact protocols, Sarah realized she was about to become humanity's first real ambassador. To whatever species this being represented, the weight of that responsibility was staggering. But looking into those fractured prism eyes, she knew she couldn't walk away. Someone had to stand up for the innocent, even if that someone was alien. Sarah spent the next 3 days establishing a basic communication system with the being she had started calling Resonance, after the musical quality of its vocalizations. Working during her off hours, she had managed to build a rudimentary translation matrix based on the mathematical principles the creature had shared. The breakthrough came when Resonance began drawing star charts on the containment barrier using its own bioluminescent fluid. Sarah recognized several constellations and was able to pinpoint the creature's origin system. What she found in the astronomical databases made her blood run cold. The Kepler 442 system had been the site of a massive stellar event 6 months ago. An entire star had gone supernova without warning, obliterating 4 inhabited worlds and sending deadly radiation coursing through nearby systems. The official reports listed it as a natural astronomical phenomenon, but Sarah was beginning to suspect otherwise. "You're home," she whispered into the intercom during another late-night session. "The star that died. You were there." Resonance's response was a low, mournful sound that needed no translation. The creature began projecting patterns of light through its crystalline formations, creating a 3-dimensional holographic display in the air above its body. Sarah watched in amazement as tiny points of light formed a perfect replica of a solar system. 4 planets orbited a central star, their surfaces covered in what looked like vast crystalline cities. Then the star began to pulse erratically. The planet's surfaces changed, showing the cities going dark one by one. Finally, the star exploded in a silent burst of light, and the planets cracked and died. When the display faded, Resonance collapsed to the floor of its containment chamber, and the sound it made was unmistakably the sound of sobbing. "You're a survivor," Sarah said softly, "the only one left." But Resonance's next communication changed everything Sarah thought she understood about the situation. The creature began projecting new images, showing sleek metallic ships approaching the dying system. Ships with energy signatures that Sarah recognized from the military databases. "Human ships?" "No," Sarah breathed. "That's impossible. We don't have the technology to cause a supernova." But Resonance continued its story, showing the human ships deploying something into the dying star, accelerating its collapse. Then came images of evacuation ships fleeing the system, desperate crystalline beings trying to escape the coming destruction. The human ships opened fire. Sarah staggered backward from the viewing window. What Resonance was showing her couldn't be true. Humanity didn't engage in genocide. They had strict protocols for interaction with other species. But as she looked at the creature's fractured form, she realized she was seeing the evidence of exactly such an atrocity. "You tried to evacuate," she said, "and we hunted you down." Resonance confirmed her worst fears. The creature had been aboard one of the last evacuation ships when human forces intercepted them. In the battle that followed, most of the refugees had been killed. Resonance had fought back not as an aggressor, but as a desperate being trying to protect the last survivors of its species. The full horror of the situation crashed over Sarah like a wave. The military wasn't studying an alien weapon. They were torturing the lone survivor of a species they had helped exterminate. And they were doing it to develop better ways to kill. Over the following days, Sarah learned more about Resonance and its people. They called themselves the Keltar, which roughly translated to harmony builders. They were an ancient species that had achieved interstellar travel through biotechnological integration, growing their ships and tools from modified crystalline organisms. They had been peaceful, focused on art, mathematics, and what could only be described as living architecture. The bioluminescent displays Resonance created weren't just communication. They were art, music, and mathematics all combined into a single expressive medium. The creature would spend hours creating beautiful, complex patterns of light and sound. And Sarah began to understand that this was how the Keltar processed emotion and memory. But the most heartbreaking revelation came when Resonance showed her why it was in so much physical pain. The crystalline formations on its body weren't just biological features. They were living memory storage, containing the preserved consciousness and experiences of other Keltar. Resonance was carrying the last fragments of its entire civilization within its own body, and the damage from the battle was slowly killing those precious remnants. Every crack in its exoskeleton represented lost memories, extinct art forms, dead voices that would never speak again. Resonance wasn't just the last of its kind. It was the living repository of everything the Keltar had ever been, and that repository was failing. "You're dying," Sarah said, and it wasn't a question. Resonance's confirmation was barely a whisper of light. The creature was slowly losing the memories it carried, and when they were gone, it would have no reason to continue living. The Keltar would be truly extinct. Sarah made a decision that would either save a species or destroy her own life. She was going to help Resonance escape, but more than that, she was going to expose what humanity had done to the Keltar system. The truth needed to come out, no matter the cost. The first step was gaining access to the classified files about the Kepler 442 incident. Sarah used her security clearance to dig deeper into the military databases, following digital breadcrumbs that led to increasingly classified information. What she found in the deep archives made her physically ill. Narration. Stellar cleanse had been a preemptive strike against what military intelligence had classified as a potential technological threat. The Keltar's biotechnological capabilities had been deemed too dangerous to allow them to continue developing. The supernova weapon had been tested for the first time on their system, designed to look like a natural astronomical event while eliminating an entire species. The patrol ships that Resonance had attacked had actually been hunting down the last evacuation vessels, under orders to leave no survivors. Resonance had fought them to protect a ship full of Keltar children, all of whom had died when their vessel's life support failed during the extended chase. Sarah sat in her quarters, staring at the evidence of humanity's first act of interstellar genocide, and realized that she might be the only person in a position to prevent it from happening again. The same military commanders who had ordered the destruction of the Keltar were now planning similar operations against other species deemed potentially threatening. But to stop them, she would need help. And the only being who could provide the evidence needed to expose the truth was slowly dying in a containment chamber 3 decks below her, carrying the last memories of a murdered civilization in its failing body. Time was running out for both Resonance and the truth. Sarah had to act soon, but she couldn't do it alone. She needed an ally, someone with the authority and the courage to stand up to the military machine that had already claimed one peaceful species. The question was whether such a person existed, and whether she could find them before it was too late. Sarah's opportunity came sooner than expected, though not in the way she had hoped. Dr. Martinez announced that Admiral Helena Voss, the architect of Operation Stellar Cleanse herself, would be arriving within the week to personally oversee the final phase of weapons testing. The final phase, Sarah learned with growing horror, would involve direct neural interface extraction. They planned to cut into Resonance's brain while it was still alive, The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. Not only would this procedure kill Resonance, but it would also destroy the irreplaceable memories of the Keltar civilization stored within its crystalline neural matrix. Humanity would complete its genocide by erasing the last traces that the Keltar had ever existed. That night, Sarah sat across from Resonance's containment chamber and made her confession through the intercom. I know what my people did to yours. I know about the star weapon, about the evacuation ships. I'm so sorry. Resonance's response was unexpected. Instead of anger or accusation, the creature created a gentle pattern of blue and gold light that somehow conveyed forgiveness. It understood that Sarah was not responsible for the crimes of her species, just as Sarah understood that Resonance bore no hatred for individual humans despite everything that had been done to it. I want to help you, Sarah continued, but I need you to help me expose the truth. The admiral who ordered your people's destruction is coming here. If we can get the evidence to the right people, maybe we can prevent this from happening to other species. Resonance considered this for a long moment, then began creating the most complex light display Sarah had ever seen. It was a complete record of the Keltar civilization, compressed into visual form, art, science, philosophy, history, and music all woven together in patterns of stunning beauty. But more importantly for Sarah's purposes, it included detailed recordings of the human attack on their system. You can store this information in a human-compatible format, Sarah asked. Resonance indicated that it could, but the process would be dangerous. The creature's biotechnological nature allowed it to interface with human computer systems, but doing so while injured might accelerate its already declining condition. It was willing to risk death to ensure the truth survived. Sarah spent the next 2 days preparing for what might be the most important data transfer in human history. She modified her personal tablet to interface with Resonance's bioluminescent communication system and set up secure storage for the massive amount of information the creature was prepared to share. The light transfer took place during the night shift, when only minimal security remained on duty. Sarah watched through the viewing window as Resonance placed its appendages against the modified interface ports she had installed. The creature's entire body began to glow with intense light as it channeled centuries of Keltar knowledge into human data systems. The process was clearly agonizing. New cracks appeared in Resonance's crystalline shell as it pushed beyond its physical limits to complete the transfer. Several times Sarah considered stopping the procedure, but Resonance insisted on continuing. The survival of its people's legacy was worth any personal cost. When the transfer finally completed 3 hours later, Resonance collapsed, its bioluminescence fading to barely visible levels. Sarah realized with growing panic that the creature might be dying. She had to make a choice: maintain her cover and hope Resonance recovered, or reveal her activities by trying to provide medical assistance. The decision was made for her when Dr. Martinez arrived for an unscheduled inspection. He found Sarah in the containment control room, frantically trying to stabilize Resonance's failing biosigns through the chamber's medical systems. "What the hell are you doing, Chen?" Martinez's voice was sharp with suspicion. The subject went into some kind of distress, Sarah lied smoothly. "I was monitoring its condition when all its biosigns started crashing. I thought you'd want me to prevent it from dying before the Admiral's arrival." Martinez studied the readouts with a frown. "These patterns don't match anything in our database. What could have caused such sudden deterioration?" Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral. "Unknown. Maybe the stress of captivity is finally taking its toll. We've been assuming it was physically resilient, but we don't really understand its physiology." For a tense moment, Martinez continued to study both the data and Sarah's face. Then he made a decision that revealed exactly how little he understood about the being in their custody. "If it dies before the Admiral arrives, she'll have our heads. Increase the life support systems and put it on constant monitoring. I want to know immediately if its condition changes." "Yes, sir," Sarah agreed, relieved that her deception had worked. But as Martinez left, she realized her position was becoming increasingly precarious. The data she had stolen was enough to expose the truth about the Keltar genocide, but she still needed a way to get it to someone who could act on it. The answer came from an unexpected source. Among the files Resonance had transferred was a list of human contacts, individuals who had attempted to negotiate with the Keltar before the military decided on their violent solution. One name stood out: Dr. Elena Vasquez, former head of the Interspecies Relations Council, who had been quietly removed. From her position shortly before Operation Stellar Cleanse, Sarah did some discreet research and discovered that Dr. Vasquez was now working as an independent, sinological consultant, but more importantly, she had been vocal in her criticism of military interference in first contact protocols. If anyone would be willing to listen to evidence of illegal military actions, it would be her. The challenge was making contact without alerting station security. Sarah's communications were monitored, her movements tracked, but resonance had given her more than just evidence. Among the Keltar technologies described in the transferred data was a method for quantum entanglement communication that could bypass traditional monitoring systems. Working through the next day, Sarah cobbled together a quantum transmitter using equipment from the Xenology lab and principles borrowed from Keltar science. It was crude compared to what the original builders could have created, but it should be sufficient to send a single undetectable message. That evening, as Admiral Voss's ship approached the station, Sarah sent her message to Dr. Vasquez. It was simple and direct. Military has alien survivor from Kepler 442, evidence of genocide. Need help immediately. Research Station Omega 7. The response came within hours. Investigating. Maintain current position. Help coming. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. Help was coming, but Admiral Voss would arrive first. In less than 12 hours, the woman responsible for the Keltar genocide would be standing in the same room as its last survivor. Sarah had to find a way to keep Resonance alive until rescue arrived, while simultaneously preventing the military from discovering her betrayal. Looking down at Resonance's weakened form, Sarah made a promise that would define the rest of her life. "Hold on," she whispered into the intercom. "Help is coming. Your people's story will be heard. I won't let them silence you." But even as she made that promise, Sarah knew that the next 24 hours would determine not just Resonance's fate, but possibly the future of human relations with other species. If she failed, the evidence of humanity's first act of interstellar genocide would die with the last of the Keltar. If she succeeded, she would become either a hero or a traitor, depending on who was telling the story. Either way, there was no going back now. Sarah had chosen her side in a conflict she was only beginning to understand, and she would see it through to the end, whatever that might be. Admiral Helena Voss was exactly what Sarah had expected: cold, efficient, and utterly without conscience. She arrived with a full military escort and immediately took control of the research station, with the kind of authority that brooked no argument. Sarah watched from the observation deck as the Admiral studied Resonance like a specimen in a laboratory, showing no recognition that she was looking at the last survivor of a species she had personally ordered exterminated. "Impressive specimen," Voss commented to Martinez during the initial briefing. "Larger than the projections suggested. Have you made progress on replicating its bioweapon capabilities?" "Some progress, Admiral," Martinez replied, clearly nervous in the presence of his ultimate superior. "But the creature's biology is more complex than we initially understood. Dr. Chen has been leading the weapons analysis." Sarah felt the Admiral's penetrating gaze turn to her and forced herself to maintain a professional demeanor. "The subject's crystalline formations appear to be integrated biotechnology," she reported, sticking as close to the truth as possible. "We've identified potential applications for adaptive armor systems and bioluminescent communication networks." "Potential applications," Voss repeated with obvious displeasure. "Dr. Martinez, you assured me that 3 months would be sufficient to extract actionable intelligence. Instead, you're giving me theoretical possibilities. Admiral, with respect, this is an entirely new form of biotechnology. We're essentially reverse engineering millions of years of alien evolution." Voss's expression didn't change, but Sarah could sense the threat in her stillness, "which is why we're moving to direct neural extraction. I've brought a team of military neurosurgeons with the latest extraction equipment. We'll have everything we need from the creature's brain within 48 hours. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. 48 hours. Dr. Vasquez's help would arrive too late if Voss proceeded with her original timeline. She had to find a way to delay the procedure without revealing her true knowledge of the situation. "Admiral," Sarah interjected carefully, "I should point out that the subject has been showing signs of systemic deterioration. Its biosigns have been unstable for the past several days. If we perform invasive procedures now, we risk losing it entirely before we can extract the information we need." Voss turned her full attention to Sarah. And for a moment, Sarah was certain the Admiral could see right through her deception. Explain. The creature's crystalline formations aren't just armor or weapons, Sarah said, improvising based on her real knowledge of Keltar physiology. They appear to be integrated neural networks. If they're damaged during extraction, we could lose access to the very information we're trying to obtain. I recommend stabilizing the subject's condition before attempting any invasive procedures. For several long seconds, Voss studied Sarah with the kind of intense scrutiny that had probably preceded many military executions. Then she turned back to Martinez. How long to stabilize the subject's condition? I'm not sure, Admiral. We don't really understand its physiology well enough to— Dr. Chen seems to understand it better than anyone else on this station, Voss interrupted. How long, Doctor? Sarah's mind raced. Too short a timeline and she'd gain nothing. Too long and Voss would become suspicious. 72 hours minimum. Possibly longer if we encounter complications. You have 48 hours, Voss decided. If the creature isn't stable enough for neural extraction by then, we proceed anyway. I didn't come out here to leave empty-handed. As the briefing concluded and the various personnel dispersed to their duties, Sarah realized she had bought resonance less than 2 days. It wasn't enough, but it would have to be. She returned to the containment area, her mind working frantically to develop some kind of plan. Resonance was awake and seemed to sense her distress. The creature's weak bioluminescence pulsed in patterns that Sarah had learned to recognize as concern. Even dying and imprisoned, it was worried about her. They want to cut into your brain, Sarah said quietly through the intercom. The Admiral who killed your people is here, and she wants to steal your memories to build better weapons. Resonance's response was a complex display of light patterns that conveyed a surprising message. It had expected this. The creature had known from the beginning that the humans would eventually attempt direct neural extraction. It had been preparing for this moment. What do you mean, preparing? Sarah asked. The answer came in the form of detailed bioluminescent instructions. Resonance had been using its time in captivity to modify its own neural structure, creating what amounted to a biological dead man's switch. If the humans attempted to extract its memories by force, the resulting neural feedback would destroy not only the stored Keltar consciousness but also overload any connected systems. You're planning to kill yourself to prevent them from getting your people's knowledge, Sarah realized. Resonance confirmed this, but also showed her something else. The creature had built a secondary system, a way to safely transfer its stored memories to a compatible recipient. The process would still kill Resonance, but the Keltar civilization's legacy would survive in someone who could be trusted to preserve it. You want to transfer the memories to me, Sarah breathed. The confirmation was gentle, but unmistakable. Resonance had been studying Sarah for weeks, learning to trust her through their interactions. It believed she would protect the Keltar legacy and ensure their story was told. But the process would fundamentally change Sarah, integrating alien memories and consciousness into her human brain. She would no longer be entirely human, but she would carry the last traces of an extinct civilization. Sarah stared at the dying alien, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. To accept would mean becoming something unprecedented in human history, a living repository of alien culture and memory. To refuse would mean letting the Keltar civilization die completely when the military extracted what they wanted from Resonance's corpse. If I do this, Sarah said slowly, will I still be me? Resonance's response was carefully nuanced. Sarah would remain Sarah, but she would also become more. The Keltar memories wouldn't overwrite her human consciousness but would integrate with it, creating something new and unique. She would have access to alien knowledge and perspectives, but her fundamental personality and values would remain intact. Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in pulsing red as the automated systems announced an incoming vessel. Sarah's heart leaped with hope. Dr. Vasquez had arrived ahead of schedule, but her relief was short-lived. Through the observation windows, she could see that the approaching ship bore military markings. It wasn't rescue, it was reinforcements. Admiral Voss had called for additional support, probably more extraction specialists and security personnel, to ensure nothing interfered with her timeline. Sarah realized with growing desperation that help wasn't coming in time. Dr. Vasquez might be investigating, But bureaucratic channels moved slowly, and military ones moved faster. She was going to have to save Resonance herself, and the only way to do that was to accept the creature's offer. "If we do this," Sarah said, "can you help me get us both out of here?" Resonance's response was complex, showing scenarios where the integration of Keltar biotechnology with human neural patterns might provide capabilities that neither species possessed alone. It was possible, but dangerous for both of them. Sarah made her decision with the kind of desperate courage that would later be remembered as either profound heroism or spectacular madness. "Do it. Transfer your people's memories to me. We'll find a way to escape together." As Resonance began the preparations for the most unprecedented act of interspecies cooperation in human history, Sarah realized she was about to become living proof that humanity's future among the stars would be defined not by its capacity for destruction, but by its willingness to stand up for the innocent, regardless of what species they belonged to. The question now was whether they would survive long enough for that future to matter. The memory transfer began at 0300 hours station time, when most of the personnel were asleep and security was at its lightest. Sarah had disabled the containment chamber's monitoring systems using codes she had extracted from the station's databases, giving them a narrow window of opportunity before someone noticed the surveillance blackout. Resonance guided her through the process with gentle bioluminescent instructions. Sarah had to place her hands on specific contact points that the creature had grown along the containment barrier, crystalline formations that could interface directly with human neural tissue. The moment their skin made contact, Sarah felt a sensation unlike anything in human experience. It began as warmth, then became something far more profound. Sarah felt her consciousness expanding, touching minds that had been dead for months but lived on in Resonance's biological memory banks. She experienced the fall of Keltar civilization, not as a historical event but as lived reality, feeling the terror and desperation of billions of beings as their star began its artificial death spiral. But along with the trauma came something beautiful. Sarah gained access to Keltar art forms that existed in dimensions human senses couldn't perceive, mathematical concepts that revealed hidden patterns in the universe, and a deep philosophical understanding of consciousness that spanned multiple species. The Keltar had been ancient when humanity was still learning to use fire, and their accumulated wisdom flowed into Sarah's mind like a river of light. The process took 4 hours, and by the end, Sarah was no longer entirely human. Her eyes now held flecks of crystalline material that allowed her to see bioluminescent spectrums, and her neural pathways had been restructured to accommodate alien thought patterns. She could feel Resonance's presence in her mind, not as an invasion, but as a partnership between two beings who had chosen to become something greater than either could be alone. When the transfer completed, Resonance was dying. The effort of sharing its stored memories had drained the last of its bioenergy reserves, but the creature's final act was to share with Sarah the location of something that could change everything. A hidden Keltar archive ship that had survived the destruction of their system. "There are others," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her hybrid consciousness. "Not many, but some survived." Resonance confirmed this with its dying light. A small group of Keltar had escaped in deep space archive vessels, ships designed to preserve their civilization's knowledge in case of catastrophe. The vessels were hidden in the void between star systems, waiting for a signal that it was safe to return. Resonance had been trying to reach them when the human patrol ships intercepted its evacuation vessel. Sarah now had the location, coordinates, and the communication protocols needed to make contact with the archive ships. But she also had something else: Resonance's biological integration technology, which would allow her to interface directly with Keltar systems. She was no longer just a human scientist. She was a living bridge between two species. The first challenge was getting off the station without being detected. Sarah's transformation wasn't immediately visible, but her behavior patterns would certainly be different enough to trigger suspicion if she interacted with her colleagues normally. She needed to maintain her cover until she could find a way to escape. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Admiral Voss decided to move up the neural extraction timeline, scheduling the procedure for 1400 hours that same day. When the medical team arrived to prepare Resonance for surgery, they found the creature apparently comatose, its biosigns barely registering on their instruments. "What happened to it?" Dr. Martinez demanded as he studied the readouts. "Unknown," Sarah replied, working hard to keep the alien harmonics out of her voice. It went into this state approximately 6 hours ago. I've been monitoring its condition, but nothing I've tried has been effective. Admiral Voss arrived moments later, her expression thunderous. Is it dying? Possibly, Sarah said. Its biological processes have slowed dramatically. I'm not sure it would survive the extraction procedure in this condition. For a moment, Sarah thought Voss might order the surgery to proceed anyway, but even the Admiral could see that extracting memories from a corpse would be pointless. How long before we know if it will recover? Difficult to say. Maybe hours, maybe days. Alien physiology doesn't follow human patterns. Voss studied the apparently comatose resonance with the calculating gaze of someone weighing military options. We'll give it 12 hours. If there's no improvement by then, we attempt the extraction anyway. Dead or alive, I want that thing's secrets. As the various personnel dispersed, Sarah remained behind to monitor Resonance's condition. In reality, she was using her new hybrid consciousness to communicate directly with the creature through bioluminescent frequencies invisible to human instruments. Resonance was indeed dying, but it was also transferring the last of its essential functions to the crystalline implants now growing within Sarah's nervous system. The plan they developed was desperate but possible. Sarah would use her security access to reach the station's communication array and send a signal to the Keltar archive ships. If any of them were close enough to receive the transmission, they might be able to mount a rescue operation. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. Sarah waited until the next shift change, then made her way to the communications section using maintenance corridors that avoided the main security checkpoints. Her hybrid consciousness allowed her to interface directly with the station's computer systems, bypassing security protocols with methods that combined human programming knowledge with Keltar biotechnological approaches. The transmission she sent was brief but comprehensive, containing identification codes that would prove to any surviving Keltar that she was carrying Resonance's memories. Along with the distress signal, she included everything she had learned about Operation Stellar Cleanse and the military's continuing plans for alien extermination. The response came within 2 hours, faster than should have been possible, unless there was an archive ship very close to their current position. The message was complex, layered with harmonic frequencies that only someone with Keltar neural integration could fully understand. Help was coming, but Sarah needed to survive for another 18 hours. That timeline became problematic when Admiral Voss decided to conduct an unscheduled inspection of all station systems. The security sweep discovered Sarah's communication transmission and traced it back to her personal access codes. Within minutes, station security was surrounding her position. Sarah found herself in the station's brig, facing Admiral Voss across a metal table with the kind of cold fury that preceded summary executions. Dr. Chen, you've been in contact with external parties regarding classified military operations. That constitutes treason under the Military Secrets Act. I've been trying to prevent a war crime, Sarah replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made several of the guards shift uncomfortably. War crime? Voss's laugh was without humor. We eliminated a potential threat to human security. The Keltar biotechnology could have been used against us if we had allowed them to continue developing it. They were peaceful. They never threatened anyone. They had the capability to threaten us. In military terms, that's the same thing. Voss leaned forward, her eyes cold as deep space. But you've given me an interesting puzzle, Dr. Chen. Our medical scanners show biological anomalies in your system that match the alien creature's biosignatures. Care to explain how that's possible? Sarah realized that her hybrid nature was becoming detectable to human medical equipment. Soon, Voss would understand exactly what had happened between her and Resonance. The knowledge would probably result in her being dissected alongside the dying Keltar. I can explain everything, Sarah said, buying time while her enhanced consciousness worked on a solution. But first, you should know that the signal I sent wasn't to human authorities. It was to surviving members of the species you tried to exterminate. They're coming for their friend. Voss's expression shifted from cold anger to something approaching concern. That's impossible. We eliminated all of them. You eliminated their home system. But the Keltar were an ancient spacefaring civilization. They had contingency plans for exactly the kind of attack you mounted against them. Before Voss could respond, the station's proximity alarms began screaming. Through the brig's small viewport, Sarah could see something that made her hybrid heart soar with hope. A crystalline ship was approaching the station, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with patterns that her Keltar memories recognized as peaceful intentions, mixed with righteous anger. The archive ship had arrived, and with it, the possibility that the last act of the Keltar genocide could be turned into the first chapter of interspecies justice. The Keltar archive ship was nothing like the twisted wreckage the humans had been studying. This vessel was alive in ways that human technology couldn't replicate, its crystalline hull shifting and flowing like liquid light as it approached the research station. Sarah could feel its presence through her hybrid consciousness, a vast intelligence that combined organic thought with technological precision. Admiral Voss was barking orders through the station's communication system, demanding that the approaching vessel identify itself and state its intentions. The response came not through traditional radio frequencies, but as a harmonic resonance that seemed to vibrate through the station's very structure. Sarah translated automatically, her Keltar memories providing context for the complex musical language. They're requesting the return of their survivor and the human who carries their memories, Sarah told Voss. They're also demanding an explanation for the attack on their evacuation vessels. Like hell, Voss snarled. All weapon systems target that ship. Prepare to fire on my command. But when the station's weapon operators tried to engage the Keltar vessel, they discovered that their targeting systems couldn't achieve a lock. The archive ship seemed to exist in a state of quantum uncertainty, shifting between multiple probable positions faster than human technology could track. Through the brig's viewport, Sarah watched a smaller craft detached from the main vessel, moving toward the station with purpose. These weren't warships but rescue vessels, designed to extract their people from dangerous situations. The Keltar had come not for vengeance but for justice and rescue. The station shook as the first rescue craft attached itself to the docking bay. Voss received reports of intruders, but these weren't the violent aliens she had expected. The Keltar moved through the station like living music, their crystalline forms harmless to anyone who didn't threaten them, but impossible to stop when they had a mission to complete. Sarah felt their approach through her hybrid consciousness, a warm presence that recognized her as family despite her human origins. When the brig's security door simply dissolved at the touch of a Keltar appendage, she found herself face to face with beings who looked like resonance but showed none of the damage and trauma of captivity. The lead Keltar, whose crystalline formations pulsed with patterns that indicated advanced age and wisdom, communicated directly with Sarah's modified neural pathways. The conversation took place in seconds but conveyed hours' worth of information. The Keltar had indeed survived the attack on their system, but barely. Only 12 archive ships had escaped, carrying perhaps 10,000 survivors from a civilization that had once numbered in the billions. They had been hiding in the deep void, afraid to make contact with any other species for fear of attracting human attention. Resonance's desperate transmission had reached them, but they had arrived too late to save the evacuation vessel it had been protecting. For months they had been planning a rescue mission, but the military station's defenses had made direct approach impossible. Only Sarah's transmission had given them the information they needed to attempt a rescue. "We must retrieve our dying friend," the elder Keltar communicated. "And we must also retrieve you, bridge builder. You carry memories that cannot be allowed to die." Admiral Voss was shouting orders, but her personnel were discovering that human weapons were largely ineffective against beings who could alter their molecular density at will. The Keltar weren't invulnerable, but they were supremely adapted for survival in hostile environments. Sarah and her Keltar escort made their way to the containment chamber where Resonance lay dying. The moment they arrived, the other Keltar began creating complex harmonic patterns that seemed to stabilize their friend's failing life signs. But Sarah could see through her hybrid consciousness that it was too late. Resonance had given too much of itself to survive. What happened next became the foundation for every interspecies cooperation protocol developed over the following decades. Resonance, in its final moments, created a bioluminescent display that told the complete story of the Keltar genocide. Every detail, from the first human ships arriving in their system to the systematic destruction of their worlds, was preserved in crystalline memory formations that the archive ship's sensors could record and preserve. But more than just evidence, Resonance created something unprecedented, a living testament to the possibility of cooperation between species. Its memories, now integrated with Sarah's human consciousness, proved that beings from different worlds could work together and become something greater than either could achieve alone. As resonance died, its bioluminescence fading to darkness, the elder Keltar made an offer that would change human history. They invited Sarah to come with them, to serve as an ambassador between their peoples and to help ensure that what had happened to the Keltar would never happen to another species. Admiral Voss arrived at the containment chamber with a full security detail, but found herself facing not just alien survivors but a human who no longer fit neatly into any category she understood. Sarah's eyes now glowed with soft crystalline light, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the station's metal walls resonate in sympathy. "It's over, Admiral," Sarah said. "The truth is going to come out. The Keltar have evidence of everything you did, and they're not the helpless victims you thought you had eliminated. They're taking that evidence to the Galactic Council." Voss raised her weapon, but the elder Keltar stepped between them. The being's form shifted, becoming translucent and allowing Voss's energy blast to pass harmlessly through its crystalline structure. In response, the Keltar simply touched the Admiral's forehead with one appendage. Voss collapsed, not dead but overwhelmed by a direct neural interface with Keltar memory systems. For just a moment, she experienced the genocide from the victim's perspective, feeling the terror and loss of billions of innocent beings dying for no crime other than being different from humans. When Voss regained consciousness, she was a changed person. The absolute certainty that had driven her military career was replaced by the crushing weight of understanding exactly what she had done. The Keltar had given her the gift of empathy, and it broke her. Sarah made her choice in that moment, accepting the Keltar offer to serve as an ambassador. But she also made a condition that would define the relationship between their species going forward. She would help the Keltar seek justice, but not vengeance. The truth about Operation Stellar Cleanse would be revealed, but through legal channels that would allow humanity to confront its crimes and choose a better path forward. The rescue ships departed with their survivors, carrying Sarah toward a future that neither species could have imagined alone. Behind them, they left a research station full of humans who would spend the rest of their lives trying to understand how they had become the monsters in someone else's story. Admiral Voss was court-martialed and sentenced to life imprisonment for crimes against sapient species, but her real punishment was living with the memories the Keltar had shared with her, understanding every day the magnitude of the suffering she had caused. Dr. Martinez resigned from military service and dedicated his remaining years to xenological research focused on communication and understanding rather than weapons development. The research station was converted into a memorial for the Keltar victims and a training center for peaceful first contact protocols. Sarah, now Ambassador Chen of the Terran-Keltar Alliance, would spend the next 3 decades helping to establish the legal and ethical frameworks that would govern humanity's expansion into the galaxy. Her hybrid consciousness became the template for a new kind of diplomacy, one based on true understanding rather than merely negotiated agreements. The Keltar archive ships emerged from hiding and began the long process of rebuilding their civilization. But they did so not in isolation but in partnership with the humans, who had proven that not all members of a species were defined by the worst actions of their leaders. Resonance's sacrifice had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. It had transformed an act of genocide into the foundation for genuine interspecies cooperation. The creature's final bioluminescent message, preserved in the archive ship's memory banks, became the founding document of what would eventually become the Galactic Confederation. The message was simple but profound. Understanding transcends species. Hope transcends death. Love transcends the distance between stars. Humanity's first attempt at interstellar genocide had become its first lesson in interstellar justice, and at the center of that transformation was the proof that sometimes the most human thing you can do is to stand up for someone who isn't human at all.